We all remember how the Twin Towers were destroyed on 9/11.
Guys, the whole tower! Holy crap!
But there was a third huge skyscraper that collapsed that day. Unlike the Twin Towers, no plane hit Tower 7.
Building 7 is the smoking gun of 9/11.
Keep your eye on that building as they're coming down, son.
What could cause a seemingly sound 47-story building to collapse?
In the building, I heard explosions. Outside of the building, I heard explosions.
Could one use a controlled demolition on any building? Sure. Did it happen to WTC 7 on 9/11? No, it did not.
The official explanation is that ordinary fires caused its collapse. But if the official story is true, this is the first and only skyscraper in the world to have collapsed because of fire.
We're asking questions. We expect some answers.
Nearly 7 years on, and the final government report on the third tower has still not been published. We talked to witnesses who have become central figures in the controversy.
It hurts when you're being accused of mass murder.
And look at new evidence to unravel the last great mystery of 9/11.
3 words, man. Money, power, and control. That's really all it comes down to.
In the American West, the internet phenomenon that is loose change has come to town.
Because this is no longer a fringe conspiracy. This is over half the American public that fully believe that the 9/11 Commission is a cover-up at the very least.
We just know that we've been lied to in a big way, and that's why we need a new investigation.
Loose change claims a government conspiracy was behind the events of 9/11 and the ensuing wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. Its makers say more than 100 million people have seen the film, making it one of the most viewed internet movies ever. Now there's a new version for the big screen. Conspiracies have become big business.
Our entire foreign and domestic policy has been based upon the events of September 11th. It has enabled the passage of Patriot Act 1 and 2.
Truth Movement is heavily centered on Building 7. And for very good reason. A lot of people are very suspicious about what went down that day.
Hidden behind the Twin Towers stood 7 World Trade Center.
It was a building that had a lot of security. There was always like police officers, undercover cops out front. It was very, very heavily guarded.
On the outside, an unremarkable building, but it had some unusual occupants. The Secret Service, the CIA, the Department of Defense, and the Office of Emergency Management, which would coordinate any response to a disaster or a terrorist attack.
You know, you have to look at what was inside Building 7. You had the largest CIA field office. You had a number of government agencies inside the building. So automatically, for a number of people, myself included, that is enough to at least raise an eyebrow.
Some say the government had to demolish Tower 7 because it's where plans were hatched for a massive conspiracy on 9/11.
Why Building 7? Let's ask the question again. As the WTC Command Center, was it the hub for the 9/11 plan?
Freedom itself was attacked this morning by a faceless coward. And freedom will be defended.
Some think the attack on the Twin Towers was orchestrated by the Bush administration, and the hijacked aeroplanes were guided to their targets from Tower 7. Others believe the government also wanted to destroy key files held there about corporate fraud. After its collapse, a CIA team is reported to have scoured the rubble looking for secret documents.
The people who knock these buildings down will hear all of us soon.
Our government will willingly kill its own citizens for whatever gain it seems necessary, and then lie as much as they need to cover it up.
It was the third tower to collapse that day, but its destruction was never mentioned in the 9/11 Commission report. And the first official inquiry into Tower 7 was unable to be definitive about what caused its collapse.
regardless of what you think actually happened to the building, it does look like and it does resemble a controlled demolition. And I do believe, as far as I know, that's the first time it's happened in architectural history. A steel high-rise building has collapsed simply because of damage and fire.
Now a group of architects, engineers and scientists who understand buildings say the official explanation that fires cause the collapse is impossible. They argue there must have been a controlled demolition.
I saw this building, which had never been hit by a plane, come crashing straight down. I must admit, I was taken aback as a physicist.
It is the most obvious example of controlled demolition with explosives.
Despite the collapse of Tower 7 making architectural history as the first skyscraper to collapse because of fire, all the steel from the 47-story skyscraper was taken away to be melted down. Some made its way into this new US Navy vessel. But it turns out one section of steel was kept. How it got to be in its present state was described by the New York Times as perhaps the deepest mystery uncovered in the investigation.
There's parts where the entire half-inch of the beam is gone, entirely dissolved right through, and so something happened to cause the steel to really thin and in some places to disappear entirely.
Critics say if you look carefully at the events of that day, there's precious little evidence of damage or fire in Tower 7. But plenty of unexplained questions that suggest something far more sinister. Tuesday, 11th of September, 2001, started like any other working day in downtown New York. But as these pictures were being filmed that morning, something extraordinary was already underway. Early that morning, the fire alarm system for the entire Building 7 was placed on test because of routine maintenance. For the next 8 hours, any alarms received from the system are to be ignored. An hour later, American Airlines Flight 11 leaves Boston's Logan International Airport.
We have a problem here. We have a hijacked aircraft headed towards New York, and we need you guys we need someone to scramble some F-16s or something up there to help us out. Is this real world or exercise? No, this is not an exercise, not a test.
At 8:46, a Boeing 767 slammed into the North Tower. It was carrying around 10,000 gallons of jet fuel.
I watched it. I seen it. Oh, wow. I heard the boom. See, I thought as soon as it happened, I said, was it terrorists? Because the fire department been waiting there. Like they've been waiting for them to come in. And I said, what is the fire department just sitting there for? That's what I'm thinking. Is it a conspiracy? And then I heard boom.
Straight away, the emergency operations plan was put into action, and police, fire, health and other teams were called to Tower 7.
Holy shit!
A second Boeing 767 laden with jet fuel hit the South Tower. 2 more planes had been hijacked, and the order was given to evacuate civilians from Tower 7.
Well, police department and Intel and FBI, they would tell us, yeah, we had a plane hit us in the Pentagon, and we now realize, it take too long to realize we were under attack.
What building would be attacked next? Tower 7?
It could have been a target. I felt at the time, because of where we were, could have been a serious target, and plus the other federal agencies in that building.
So the decision is made to evacuate the very office designed to respond to a terrorist attack, the Office of Emergency Management. But not everyone leaves. Unaware of the evacuation order, a member of the emergency response team heads up to the 23rd floor. He is about to be trapped inside a building on the verge of destruction. Feared dead by his family, Barry Jennings has become the key witness in the controversy over what really happened inside Tower 7.
I'm just lucky to be alive because I didn't realize, and maybe that's a good thing, I didn't realize how close I was to death.
When he reaches the Office of Emergency Management, he's shocked by what he sees.
To my amazement, nobody's there. I saw coffee that was still hot. They were still smoldering. They had screens all over the place. The screens were blank. So I didn't know what was going on. At that time, I received a phone call from one of my higher-ups. And he said, "Where are you?" And I said, the emergency command center. A long pause. And then he came back and he said, "Get out of there now."
At 9:59, the 1,300-foot South Tower collapses.
Oh my God!
Debris and dust are thrown over a huge area, and Tower 7 doesn't escape. These are some of the only pictures of Building 7 at that moment. Just over a minute later, the fire alarm in Tower 7 is triggered, but because it's on test, there's no information about where the fires are.
What happened? Did the side of the building come down? Something fell. What did you see? It was pretty clear at one point, and then there's a whole bunch of smoke and glass. And I think we're just about the last ones in this building right now. I think you should leave. Everybody else is gone.
I wanted to get out of that building in a hurry. So I started, instead of taking one step at a time, I'm jumping landings. When I reached down to the 6th floor, there was this eerie sound. The whole building went dark, and the staircase that I was standing on just gave way.
At 10:28, the North Tower collapses in just 11 seconds. This time, Tower 7 takes a direct hit from the collapsing building. According to the official account, this is the start of a chain of events that will ultimately lead to the collapse of Tower 7. The World Trade Center complex in the heart of downtown Manhattan contains 7 buildings occupied by many of the world's leading financial companies. The Twin Towers rose above the site more than 1,300 feet tall. Tower 7 was 610 feet tall and just 350 feet away from the North Tower. As the North Tower collapsed, debris hit Tower 7 and fires were immediately reported in the building. Early evidence of explosives, or just debris from a falling skyscraper. Barry Jennings was still trapped inside.
When we got to the 8th floor, I started walking to one side of the building. That side of the building was gone.
And he heard sounds that unnerved him.
The first explosion I heard when I was on the stairwell landing, when we made it down to the 6th floor. Then when we made it back to the 8th floor, I heard some more explosions.
What's the sound?
Like a boom. Like an explosion.
And more than one?
Yes.
Barry Jennings was also an eyewitness to the fires that were spreading through the building.
I could smell fire, you could smell the smoke, and I felt the heat. It was intense.
The official investigators say ordinary fires were responsible for the collapse of Tower 7. But if that's right, why didn't the fire services fight them?
There's no way to put the fire out. Well, we got all kinds of water problems. The 2 trade buildings took out the mains. We can handle just about everything. This is beyond.
When they collapsed, the Twin Towers severed water mains, stopping the sprinklers in Tower 7 and severely hindering firefighting. Eventually, fireboats were used, to pump what water they could from the Hudson River. A new group has been set up bringing together architects and engineers from across the country that question the official explanation. Richard Gage is a member of the American Institute of Architects. He's been an architect in California for 20 years. He set up the group Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth, which now has more than 390 professionals from around the world.
No steel frame high-rise building has ever collapsed due to fire, and we have over 100 examples from which to choose.
In 1991, a fire in a Philadelphia skyscraper raged for 18 hours, but it didn't collapse. In 2005, a 32-story building in Madrid burned for a whole day. There was a partial collapse, but the building remained standing. Tower 7 burned for 7 hours.
The Madrid building burned for 24 hours, and my understanding is that the steel around the perimeter was not fireproofed. In Building 7, we have a completely fireproofed building to 2 and 3 hours.
What's more, a series of experiments were carried out in these giant hangars in Cardington, Bedfordshire in the mid-1990s. They showed that steel buildings were more robust than previously thought.
The Cardington tests in the UK were exemplary in that the steel did not collapse as a result of these tests.
A purpose-built 8-story steel building was set on fire. For a short time, the steel reached temperatures of more than 1,000 degrees centigrade, far hotter than in Tower 7. Ceiling beams did sag, but no collapse was observed in any of the 6 experiments.
I'm deeply troubled by the collapse of Building 7. Because if the official story is true, then what they're telling us is that our existing building codes, to which thousands of skyscrapers are currently designed with 2 and 3 hour fire protection, there's a serious problem.
The official investigators accept the fires in Tower 7 were never hot enough to melt steel. They think the steel was heated to about 600 degrees centigrade, crucially the temperature at which steel loses half its strength. According to the official investigators, the main fires were concentrated on floors 6 through to 13, except floor 10. And there were fires initially on some of the upper floors. A fire protection engineer who's joined the group says the fires were not severe.
The fires weren't burning on all the floors simultaneously. They were scattered about on the floors. And as they burn, they're going to move through the building, so it will certainly heat up some of the steel in an area. But then as it moves on, when it consumes the combustibles there, the chairs, the desk, the tables, whatever papers were there, then there's no longer any source of heat.
After surviving for 3 hours, trapped inside an inferno, Barry Jennings was finally rescued.
When we get outside, a police officer comes to me and says, you have to run. We have more information of bombs, so you have to run. When I got to maybe the 19th block, Channel 7 Eyewitness News says, can we talk to you? I said, I need an ambulance. The guy said, well, just let me talk to you right quick.
We started walking down the stairs. We made it to the 8th floor. Big explosion. Blew us back into the 8th floor.
All this time, I didn't know it. All this time, somebody had called my wife. Told her I died in the building.
Big explosion.
Who comes over the TV sets? Whose voice comes over? It's mine. And my sister said, wait a minute, that's Barry right there.
I said, this is it. We're dead. We're not going to make it out of here. I took a fire extinguisher and I bust the window out.
So my wife comes flying back down the stairs and says, wait a minute, is this live? Because we were told he was dead. And the little caption in the corner, left-hand corner of the TV said it was live.
The 2 tallest buildings in New York had just collapsed, and just after midday, firefighters were watching Tower 7 nervously. The deputy chief of the New York Fire Department that day remembers the scene.
Well, we had our special operations people set up surveying instruments to monitor and see if there was any movement in the building. We were concerned of the possibility of collapse of the building. And we had a discussion with one particular engineer there, and we asked him if we allowed it to burn, could we anticipate a collapse, and if so, how soon? And it turned out that he was pretty much right on the money, that he said in its current state about you have about 5 hours.
Some people have interpreted this anticipation of collapse as evidence that the fire department and others were planning its destruction.
Silverstein, a commercial real estate tycoon with international political connections, acquired a 99-year lease.
And the owner, Larry Silverstein, has also been accused of being part of a huge conspiracy to destroy the buildings. It all stems from a TV interview when he used the phrase, "pull it."
I remember getting a call from the fire department commander telling me that they were not sure they were going to be able to contain the fire. And I said, you know, we've had such terrible loss of life. Maybe the smartest thing to do is pull it. And they made that decision to pull.
I ask every viewer to come to their own conclusion about the language Larry's using and the emphasis.
Maybe the smartest thing to do is pull it.
My personal response to his comment is that he was involved in a decision to bring the building down. But who knows what he was thinking or saying. This is just speculation.
Critics say just 2 months before 9/11, Larry Silverstein took out a $3.5 billion insurance policy on the Twin Towers. A policy that would pay out in the event of a terrorist attack. But without this policy, Larry Silverstein would not have been able to buy the buildings, and the insurance was not just for terrorism. The insurance on Tower 7 dated from 1987, when it was built.
And you don't say, we made the decision to pull it, which refers to something. You wouldn't say that about a group of firemen. You would say, we made a decision to pull them out of the building.
Larry Silverstein denies any involvement in any possible conspiracy. Is there a simpler explanation? The fire chief, who was forced to assume command of New York's rescue operation that day, had narrowly escaped death with the collapse of the South Tower.
It was like the surface of another planet. All there was powdered debris and metal. It was a very strange scene.
Emergency teams scoured the wreckage, desperately searching for survivors, among them hundreds of their own friends and colleagues. At 3 o'clock, with the condition of Tower 7 deteriorating rapidly, Chief Nigro was forced to make an impossible choice.
The biggest decision was to make an evacuation zone around number 7, to pull everyone away, to stop the rescue efforts that were going on, which was very difficult to do because there were people trapped still, and to step back and wait.
But was Larry Silverstein really giving the orders?
We don't need to ask permission from the owner, no. When we're in charge of the building, we're in charge, and that decision would be the fire chief and his alone. That's why I would know that there is no conspiracy, because for me to be a part of that would be obscene. And it disgusts me to even think of it.
It's alleged that it was not just the government, the police and the fire department that conspired to destroy Tower 7. People have also pointed the finger at the media for reporting the building had collapsed when it was still standing.
We are getting information now that one of the other buildings, Building 7, in the World Trade Center complex, is on fire and has either collapsed or is collapsing.
Now, more on the latest building collapse in New York. You might have heard a few moments ago I was talking about...
Some have suggested the media were handed scripts by the conspirators.
This morning's attacks. We'll probably find out more now about that from our correspondent, Jane Stanley. Jane, what more can you tell us about...
But Tower 7 was still standing behind her.
It almost sounded too far-fetched. Well, unfortunately, I think we've lost the line with Jane Stanley.
At 5:21 p.m., Tower 7 finally collapses. The 47-story skyscraper and its contents are pulverized to dust.
The sixth grader can look at this building falling at virtually free-fall speed, symmetrically and smoothly, and see that it is not a natural process. Buildings that fall in natural processes fall to the path of least resistance. They don't go straight down through themselves.
Tower 7 was a large skyscraper. At 610 feet high, it had 47 floors, each the size of a football field. There were only a few places foundations could be put down because it was built over a subway and an electricity substation, so long beams were needed to take the weight of the building on the east side, on the right here, and it had to be reinforced on the 5th to 7th floors, and also between the 22nd and 24th floors. It had 81 columns, 57 columns around the edge, and 24 core columns inside.
In order for the perimeter to fall perfectly and symmetrically, which it pretty much does at Building 7, all of those columns have to be removed within a tenth of a second of each other. Fire cannot do that. Controlled demolition can.
A structural engineer who's joined Richard Gage's group says he can imagine 1 or 2 columns collapsing.
It is possible that you could have a local failure as a result of a connection failing. But the likelihood of that failure dragging the entire building in such a fashion that all the columns would fail at the same time is an impossibility.
Impossibility?
Yes.
Did Building 7 collapse because of damage from the falling North Tower? Or was it also a controlled demolition?
Loose Change has found one demolition expert with 28 years' experience who thinks he knows what happened. When he was shown the video for the first time, he was taken aback.
Dit is controlled demolition.
Zeker weten.
Zeker weten. Er is nagesprongen. Dit is in opdracht gebeurd. Het heeft een team gedaan van experts.
Maar dit is ook op 11 september gebeurd.
Weet je dat zeker?
Ja.
Was het zeker weten de 11e? Dat kan geen waar zijn.
7 uur nadat de World Trade Center naar beneden viel.
Ja? Hebben ze hard gewerkt.
But it's not a view shared by other demolition experts. Control Demolition Incorporated is one of the world's leading demolition companies. Mark Loiseau has been in this family business all his life. He knows what it takes to bring a building down.
The largest steel structure we've taken down, which I think is still a Guinness record, is the J.L. Hudson building in Detroit. It took months to design it. It took months to prepare the structure for the placement of the explosive charges. Months. It's noisy. There's just no way to get around it. You go in, you knock out, usually, all the walls on the floors where you place explosives. Gut them.
Then there's the placing of all the hundreds of explosive charges, plus literally miles of initiating cable and miles more detonating cord.
Is it actually possible to have done a controlled demolition of a building like Building 7 and it to be occupied and no one to have seen anything?
In a screenplay, in a movie, something with Bruce Willis in it, maybe. In reality, no.
But the architect Richard Gage has an answer for that.
It's possible, although this is mere speculation, that the explosives could have been planted prior to each floor being remodeled, or during such remodeling, or even during the initial erection of the building.
So when would that be? What sort of dates would you get into for that?
The building was built in the 80s.
Really? I don't know what to say to that. These explosives have a life expectancy. They have a shelf life. Some of the ones manufactured here in this country, they say use within 3 years. Otherwise, you can't trust them to go off at all.
But what about the sounds of explosions before the collapse? This one was recorded after both of the Twin Towers had collapsed and before Tower 7's collapse.
What's an explosion sound like? Most people don't know because most people have never heard one. So any sharp, loud bang That's probably an explosion.
10 massive buildings were partially damaged or destroyed on 9/11. Everywhere, burning cars and trucks and petrol tanks exploding. But was any evidence found of the huge explosive charges that would be needed at the time of Tower 7's collapse?
When you're dealing with charges this size, the amount of air that is displaced will break windows easily.
Mark Loiseau was brought in by the Office of Emergency Management 3 days after 9/11 to advise on the removal of debris.
There were a lot of broken windows there, mainly from impact of debris, but I didn't see windows broken on the backs of buildings, only where debris falling from the towers struck it. But come around the backside, no. Windows weren't broken there. They were shielded from debris falling. If explosives of the magnitude necessary to cut the columns in a big building were detonated, the windows all the way around would have been shattered. No way around it.
And they would leave behind some unmistakable signs of explosives.
In a structure that is taken down with explosives, you would find these tubes. You would very likely find the upper portion of this cap where the delay element is.
Investigators for the first inquiry by the Federal Emergency Management Agency, or FEMA, were on the scene immediately. Dr. Gene Corley was the lead investigator. A structural engineer for 50 years, he did the forensic work on the Oklahoma City bombing, on the Waco fire, as well as the World Trade Center, all subjects of conspiracy theories.
We looked at everything. Controlled demolition was ruled out because there was no evidence of controlled demolition.
And you looked for evidence of it?
We looked for it, yes. And we found no evidence of controlled demolition.
Every inch of the site was picked over by hundreds of people. No one reported any signs of explosives. Up in Utah, there's a scientist who thinks he has an explanation. His theory is so controversial, he left his job as a professor of physics because of it. Stephen Jones thinks he's found evidence of an unconventional explosive in the dust from the World Trade Center.
It is rather like a DNA in an investigation. In other words, this dust carries all this information of what caused it, what created it. And it holds on to that information, and it's just crying from the dust for us to look at it.
Professor Jones thinks there was a conspiracy to destroy Tower 7 and the Twin Towers using a strange substance that can quite literally melt steel.
Thermite is a very active chemical reaction. It produces molten iron spheres. The chemical pattern, the fingerprint of thermite, the spheres you get from thermite, matches the spheres that I see in the World Trade Center dust.
Both the dust and thermite contain iron oxide and aluminium.
What do you think? I would say that it melted out the whole side. Oh, went right through the aluminum, of course, I should have. So as the thermite reacts, it blows molten iron into the air, where it forms droplets due to surface tension, and then those solidify and form these little spheres.
Using a scanning electron microscope, Professor Jones is able to produce high-resolution images of the spheres in the 9/11 dust. And he was given one sample from Brooklyn Bridge, found within an hour of the collapse of the Twin Towers. The dust was collected by photography student Frank D'Alessio.
Yeah, I was sort of playing with it that day. You could, pushing it off, and sort of, it was like snow. There was, an abundant amount, caked up above. And I'm pretty sure I got it right within there, and then headed out.
This is the one that was within 20 minutes of the collapse of the towers. It was a great sample.
These iron-rich spheres can only be formed at very high temperatures. The office fires in Tower 7 on 9/11 were not hot enough. Professor Jones is convinced the spheres were formed by thermite, which generates extreme temperatures. When a NASA aeroplane flew over Ground Zero, the temperatures recorded were remarkably high. The highest, within Tower 7's footprint, was 727 degrees centigrade. Yet this was 5 days after 9/11, and firemen had been spraying huge amounts of water on the site. And there are reports of red-hot metal in the debris. But there is another explanation for the iron spheres. They could have come from cutting torches used after 9/11 to clear the site, or from any building work before. Stephen Jones says that doesn't explain the presence of aluminium, and he thinks these red chips in the dust could even be unreacted thermite.
I saw thermite once in high school. It was very impressive, but I've never seen anyone use a material which melts steel for demolition purposes. I don't see how you could possibly get all of the columns to melt through at the same time.
On the internet, there are references to secret formulations of thermite that have special properties.
You can cut with thermite without a large explosion. You see? In other words, for thermite, you can formulate it to burn rapidly or slowly. The key is nanothermite. Why won't people deal with super thermite? It's like they don't want to see it, I guess. I don't know, but it does exist. We have reports of it in a sol gel form. It's very explosive. The sol gel can be formed and shaped.
I suppose you can keep saying, but what if, and you could go to Fantasyland and make up whatever you wanted. It's just not real. It's not real. The materials and the technologies just aren't there. If they were, I'd know.
Mark Loiseau is not unbiased due to his very wealthy clientele. He also works for the federal government. He can't come out and say this is a controlled demolition if he doesn't want to lose many of his top clients.
But other people have gone much further and accused Mark Loiseau of being part of a conspiracy.
They say that you did work at Ground Zero, which you did, and you've got the absolute perfect credentials for a government-paid demolition expert, and of course you're going to say, I didn't do it, but you've absolutely fit the bill.
I'd make a great terrorist, I suppose. Unfortunately, I don't have those inclinations.
Since 9/11, Mark Loiseau and his company have been the subject of a hate campaign and even accused of mass murder.
I'm disturbed by 9/11. I'm disturbed by all of this. But I think there are ways to handle it and ways that you don't handle it. And you certainly don't terrorize people like the good folks that work here and family members.
A new Building 7 was opened in 2006. It's thinner, but taller than the previous one. Over the last nearly 7 years, the work on clearing and rebuilding Ground Zero has continued, and new evidence has emerged which supports the official theory that fire brought Tower 7 down. This is some of the only footage of the south face of the building, and it shows the whole side engulfed in smoke. Until now, most people have only seen the other sides, where there was much less obvious damage. Richard Rotans had to assess the damage to Tower 7, and crucially, he saw the south face just after the north tower had collapsed, slamming debris into it.
We're looking at the upper floors of Tower 7. You can see columns gone, floors collapsed, heavy smoke coming out, and fire. The upper floors were an inferno.
And then he had to go into that building to assess it.
You could hear the building creak above us. You could hear things fall. You could hear the fire burning. You could see columns just hanging from the upper floors, gaping holes in the floors up above us. There was an elevator car that was blown out of its shaft and it was down the hall. This is, the massive impact from the fall of Tower 1 onto Tower 7.
And there are photographs that show much more clearly the extent of the damage from the collapse of the North Tower and the fires that followed in Tower 7.
We need volunteers for first aid. We have water, we have a little water here. Raise the buses, raise the trucks.
one photographer was able to get close to Building 7 because he was an honorary deputy chief in the... These are some of his pictures.
You could see that part of the south part of the building was damaged heavily. There was a big hole in the building on the whole corner of the side of the building on the south side. There's a big hole in the building that looks like it was coming from either the 12th or 14th floor all the way down. And it got wires that got lower. And you could see part of the building is bowed out a little bit. It was, to me, that's major structural damage. In fact, I see a spandrel sticking into the part of number 7 here, right here. And there's smoke on a lot of floors on the south side of the building. And I saw fire coming out some of these windows. And that, through my experience of taking fire photography for the last 30 years, to me that's an indication of extremely heavy fire condition and a dangerous fire condition.
The architect, Richard Gage, is not impressed. He says the smoke on the south side may not be from Tower 7 at all.
This is indicative of a negative pressure which drew the smoke from the World Trade Center 6 or 5 that was burning quite severely. So if that photo was of smoke, it would have to be coming from every window. But there was no fires from every window, and right around the corner where the smoke stops, there's no fires, and there's no visible flames in any of that smoke. So it appears to not be coming from World Trade Center 7.
It was from number 7. The smoke was coming out of the building, not going from the opposite direction. That's insane. It was coming out of the windows. You see it on the video, you see it in the still pictures. There was heavy smoke, numerous floors had fire on it.
And Steve Spack filmed fires not just on the south side, but also on the other sides as the fires spread.
You see windows popping and falling. See a window come out, and it drops and hits the floor. Boom, you know, the window, the glass. And it's moving from window to window, and that's what fire does. It's going to travel. It was windy that day. I'm sure that fed the fire, that, you know, the oxygen got in there, and that fire just took off.
Another fireman who was there that day is clear about what he witnessed.
We saw the fire and the smoke on the south side of Building 7. A lot of damage, a lot of damage. And the smoke, tremendous amount of smoke. I couldn't tell what floor it ended at.
And he also saw the east side of Tower 7.
The windows on approximately 10th to 15th floor of Building 7 started to fail from the heavy fire inside. We looked at it and said, there's so much fire in this building, nobody's going to put this fire out.
Then after being told there was nothing more they could do to save Building 7, he walked away and witnessed its collapse.
We heard it sounded like a jet engine, and if we looked over the buildings, you could see the top of Building 7, and it just started to shake and then just disappeared down. And it was down in about 7 or 8 or 9 seconds. It was just gone. I saw the fire, I saw the damage, and that was good enough for me. I never heard any charges, I never heard any sequence of explosions, timed explosions. And I never heard anyone talk about that until a long time later.
In the last few years, the scale of the alleged conspiracy has grown and grown. Not just the government and foreign intelligence, but police, fire service, and even the media.
Now, more on the latest building collapse in New York. You might have heard.
Where did CNN and BBC get their information, especially considering the building was still standing directly behind their reporters?
Well, I think you have to put it in the context of what was an incredibly chaotic day for everybody involved in trying to cover the story. The investigations we've carried out suggest very strongly that we were working on the basis of an incorrect news agency report. We had this statement from Reuters. It came sometime after our original inquiries, actually, but what it says is, on September the 11th, 2001, Reuters incorrectly reported that one of the buildings at the New York World Trade Center, 7 WTC, had collapsed before it actually did. The report was picked up from a local news story and was withdrawn as soon as it emerged that the building had not fallen.
Do you think that's suspicious?
Not really. I didn't even really, to be honest with you, I didn't even want to put that line in. But, you know, I'm not the only person on the team. I do think it's a little embarrassing on both the part of CNN and BBC.
Even more embarrassing, the BBC lost key tapes of its 9/11 coverage. But we found them. It turned out they'd been put back on the wrong shelf. 2002, rather than 2001. Cock-up rather than conspiracy.
Our correspondent, Jane Stanley.
What of the reporter herself? She's never talked about this before. Jane Stanley was a world affairs specialist and had just arrived in New York. The BBC quickly found a place to interview her, but she had precious little information to go on.
I was thrown not a question, but a statement of fact. I don't know where that came from.
Jane, what more can you tell us about its collapse?
Well, only really what you already know. Details are very, very sketchy. I mean, it's very, very difficult being in that position where you've got no communications, no access to information, and that just comes out of left field. Details are very, very sketchy. It was very upsetting about a year ago because of the level of persecution and the virulence in which I was spoken about. And it's just very unfortunate that this whole conspiracy, kind of, I think, rather ridiculous situation has grown out of what's really a very small and very honest mistake.
Well, unfortunately, I think we've lost the line with Jane Stanley.
The BBC says there's a simple explanation for the interview ending abruptly. The satellite feed had an electronic timer, which cut out at 5:15 exactly.
This is the Alex Jones Show on News Radio 590 KLPJ.
Boom, there's a huge explosion. There's dead people all over the lobby, and the cops are saying don't look at them, because remember they say nobody died. But folks, we have them. This is so huge.
Every word used by eyewitnesses is picked over in a relentless search for a hidden truth. Conspiracy talk shows and websites seized on an interview for loose change with a crucial witness, Barry Jennings. There's no evidence that anyone died in Tower 7 on 9/11. But did Barry's interview suggest something else?
The amount of detail that Barry gave us in this interview is unreal. He says he was stepping over dead bodies in the lobby.
Trouble is, Barry Jennings himself disagrees with their interpretation of his words.
I didn't like the way, you know, I was portrayed. They portrayed me as seeing dead bodies. I never saw dead bodies.
Lobby at nice escalators.
But Dylan Avery has a recording of his interview, and he's unrepentant.
And the firefighter that took us down kept saying, do not look down. And I kept saying why he said, do not look down. And we're stepping over people. And you know you can feel when you're stepping over people. That's not...
I didn't take anything out of context.
I said it felt like I was stepping over them, but I never saw them. And, you know, that's the way they portrayed me, and I didn't appreciate that, so I told them to pull my interview. Do I think that our government would do something like that to its people? No. I honestly don't believe that. Well, I know that I was in there, heard what I heard, saw what I saw.
In New England, the claims of the mysterious melted steel from Tower 7 has been unravelled. It was found by fire protection engineer Professor Jonathan Bonnet in a salvage yard.
It came from a much larger beam. This was the size of steel that they used in the construction of Tower 7. They didn't use this particular kind of steel in Towers 1 or Towers 2. So that's why we know its pedigree. It was a surprise to me because it was so eroded and deformed, and so we took it for analysis in the lab.
Well, it was attacked by what we determined was a liquid slag. When we did the analysis, we actually identified it as a liquid containing iron, sulfur, and oxygen. You can see what it does is it attacks the grain boundaries, and this bit would eventually have fallen out, and it would continue the attack.
Professor Sisson says it didn't melt, it eroded. The cause were those very hot fires and the debris after 9/11 that cooked the steel over weeks. The sulfur came from masses of gypsum wallboard that was pulverized and burnt in the fires.
I don't find it very mysterious at all. That if I have steel in this sort of a high temperature atmosphere that's rich in oxygen and sulfur, this would be the kind of result I would expect.
The way official bodies have investigated Tower 7 at the World Trade Center makes some people think they're hiding something. The first inquiry into Tower 7 by FEMA said the building collapsed because intense fires had burned for hours, fed by thousands of gallons of diesel stored in the building. But it said this had only a low probability of occurrence, and more work was needed. critics point out that was 6 years ago. Shyam Sundar has studied the steel from the Twin Towers. He heads the Tower 7 investigation by the National Institute of Standards and Technology.
We've been at this for a little over 2 years, and doing a 2 or 2.5 year investigation is not at all unusual. That's the same kind of time frame that takes place when we do airplane crash investigations. It takes a few years.
With no steel from Tower 7 to study, investigators have instead made 4 complex computer models, worked out to the finest detail. They're confident their approach will provide the answers.
We're moving as fast as we can. It's a very complex problem. It requires a level of fidelity in the modeling and rigor in the analysis that has never been done before.
Through here, the red area is showing where we had observed structural damage. You see there's a little bit of...
They say the main reason for the collapse were normal office fires, not the diesel as first thought.
You can see here we either have large sagging or buckling occurring in some of these floor beams, and these circles indicate the condition of the connections, where yellow is a partial failure and a pink is a full failure where the entire connection no longer is attached to the column.
Other skyscrapers haven't fully collapsed before because of fire, but what happened on 9/11 was unique. Tower 7 was built over an electricity substation. There were many fires, and crucially, firefighters could not fight the fires in Tower 7. They didn't have enough water and focused on saving lives.
Our working hypothesis now actually suggests that it was normal building fires that were growing and spreading throughout the multiple floors that may have caused the ultimate collapse of the buildings.
Investigators have focused on the east side, where the long floor spans were under most stress. They think fires burnt long enough to weaken and break many of the connections that held the steel structure together. Most susceptible were the thinner floor beams, which required less fireproofing, and the connections between the beams and the columns. As they heated up, the connections failed, and the beams sagged and failed also.
The combination of those two effects makes that column go unstable. When that happens, it leads then to a very large, unsupported column length.
And there's hard physical evidence from another building at the World Trade Center, which helps explain how fire could have caused Tower 7 to collapse.
Several of us went into Building 5, and as we walked along on the floor, we came to the edge of a concrete slab and looked out and were stunned because we saw a major collapse. We saw an interior section of the building that had collapsed simply due to fire.
The steel was heated for hours, weakening it, and the connections sagged and failed. But what about the speed and neat symmetry of the collapse?
The penthouse dropped, and then the entire perimeter of the main building begins and goes straight down in 6.5 seconds, which is virtually free fall speed.
It turns out that when you have connections that essentially don't have strength for the loads that they are being subjected to, and you have this massive failure of a column, it does not take time. The structure has lost all integrity at that point in time.
The final report on 9/11 is promised soon, but there's already a fierce battle on the airwaves and the internet.
Call for quiet on the set.
Live free or die.
Good evening, and welcome to Hardfire. I'm Ronald Wick. Tonight,
a community TV station in New York hosts a regular program aimed at debunking conspiracy theories.
They had a big head start. When I got involved in this in April of 2006, there were already over 1 million pages on the internet devoted to 9/11 conspiracy theories.
There is nothing that could falsify their beliefs.
Yeah, it's a religious
purely
belief.
fake. In other words, there is simply no evidence that you could show them.
The entire game is being selective with them. It's picking little anomalies out. Some of them are big anomalies, the way they see them. But not connecting them in any coherent way. There's no coherent hypothesis, and we keep asking for one. How does this fit into any larger theory?
Some of the anomalies have been answered, but the big questions remain. How was a conspiracy carried out? Why? By who? And was it an inside job? The chief counter-terrorism advisor to President Bush on 9/11 was Richard Clarke, and he was with Vice President Dick Cheney in the White House that morning.
People who believe in conspiracy theories, and particularly this one about WTC-7, don't understand government and clearly have never worked in government. Anyone who's ever worked in government will tell you two things: that the government doesn't have the competence to do a large-scale conspiracy like this, and number two, it can't maintain secrecy. There's almost nothing that I know of in 30 years of having top-secret clearances that hasn't come out in the Washington Post and the New York Times.
There can be no whitewash at the White House.
So there's no way this conspiracy of knocking down WTC-7 could have happened.
But he's got 30 years of experience.
I don't care what kind of fucking experience he has, man. I don't care. He's a person in the system. Of course he's going to tell you those kinds of things. You honestly think Richard Clarke is going to come out and say, oh yeah, of course the government was part of it. Oh yeah, of course there's a cover-up. No, he's going to fucking toe the party line and defend the government. He's going to defend his ex-bosses. Come on, man.
The former chief counter-terrorism advisor does not think there's anything mysterious about Tower 7.
I was in the World Trade Center 7 on a number of occasions. This was an office building in downtown New York. I mean, the fact that there were some government agencies in there is certainly true, but there were lots of other people in there too, and you could have rented an office or floor. Anybody could have.
Every weekend, self-styled 9/11 truthers gather at Ground Zero.
We think we're being lied to, and we can prove that. We're giving out free information about questions of 9/11, and we're giving out free DVDs. This is not a protest, this is a vigil of just giving out free information. Now, we don't come up with any particular theories. We're not going to tell you what happened because we don't know what happened. And I think it's extremely disrespectful from somebody outside of 9/11 to tell you exactly what happened because these questions are unanswered. You know, questions of what happened to World Trade Center 7 are unanswered.
I guess everyone's entitled to their opinion. It kind of angers me because I was there. I've heard people talk about it that come from Cincinnati and California and wherever else they come from. I was here, you weren't. I think they have no respect for all the friends of mine that I lost and all the people that died that day. It's like a slap in their face.
Nearly 3,000 people died on 9/11, including 343 New York firefighters. The man who was in charge that day hopes the official report on Tower 7 will finally end a painful chapter in America's history.
Conspiracies can always be more exciting than the real thing because you can always add to them. It makes for great fiction. And I enjoy great fiction myself, but when it comes to real life, I think we have to know one side of the page is real life, one side of the page is fiction, and draw the line between them and live in the real world and enjoy our fiction as fiction.